QSO Today, episode 275, Bob Logan NZ5A. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you that a new ICOM transceiver should be on your holiday wish list. And by QRP Labs, my friend Hans Summers G0UPL's radio kit company, makers of the popular QCX kit transceiver. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, your host. My guest this week describes himself as a third-generation Texas Longhorn. Bob Logan NZ5A has spent over 55 years as a ham radio operator, enjoying the simple pleasures of exploring new modes of communication after mastering old ones. Bob is a collector and restorer of old ham radio gear, and he collects and restores old broadcast radios. Bob reminds us that we hams are a community who like to share what we learn in our fine hobby with others. I came away from this QSO liking Bob and his appreciation for amateur radio and the simple wisdom that keeps him enjoying it. NZ5A, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Bob?
Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Bob. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. In an earlier message to me, you said that you're a third-generation Longhorn. What's a Longhorn, Bob?
Well, a Longhorn is cattle in Texas with long, sharp, curved horns. Sometimes they grow 6 feet long. And the University of Texas adopted Longhorns as its symbol, I guess it is, its mascot. And so the University of Texas Longhorns, I said I'm a Longhorn fan. That's what I meant.
This is football, right?
Yeah, football, and that's what I mainly enjoy. And I'm a third generation. My father was, I am, and my kids are. So we've been Longhorns a long time.
Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, the story actually began long before I got my license. I was raised by my grandfather and grandmother, me and my two brothers and sisters, in Hebronville, Texas. It's a little town about 35 miles east of Laredo, Texas. And he had a big Magnavox console in the living room, you know, with a shortwave band and all that stuff. And he used to listen to it at night a lot. And one of his favorite things was to listen to Big Ben chime at midnight on New Year's Eve. And I just, he explained where England was. And I thought, wow, this is cool. And then we moved from there to Freer, Texas, which is about 60 miles east of Laredo. And it was an odd little experience that kind of made me understand what radio is about. I listened to the radio, to the San Antonio radio station, and they were playing songs, and heard Frank Sinatra, and I was walking from the house to town. We lived about 2 miles from town. And I thought, and the DJ said, we're going to welcome Frank Sinatra to the studio today. Well, he wasn't in the studio. But it struck me, wow, he was playing something from somebody who wasn't even there, and I heard it. And it was kind of one of those moments, And then we moved to Alice, Texas, which is about 45 miles east of Freer. And I still wasn't a ham yet, but I was just fascinated by this radio stuff. And I had a green table radio, just a little old 10 by 4 radio there. This green Zenith radio, and it had a shortwave band. And I thought, well, I'll just turn it on and see. And I was able to pick up ships in the harbor in Corpus Christi. And I thought, wow, this is cool. I mean, I was getting, more and more excited about this stuff here. So we moved to Corpus, and I was getting near my ham lesson. I hope I'm not boring it. We moved to Corpus Christi in the 4th grade, which is right on the coast. We lived about a long block from the bay, and I used to walk there every day and just fish and all kinds of stuff like that. And moved to Corpus, and somehow, somewhere, later on I'll tell you about the rigs. I think you want to ask about that. I listened to my radio, just plain old, consumer radio. And then one day, I was driving home from my accordion practice. I used to play 120 bass piano accordion. And we passed a store called Triple E, electronics, engineering, and so forth. And, had radios in there. So one day I walked from our house to Triple E, which was about 4 miles or so, 5 miles. And I walked in the store, and you could just smell the electronics. You could smell equipment. It's a wonderful smell to me. And they had a separate room with a sign above it that said ham radio room. And I thought, whoa. So I walk in there, and there's all these wonderful rigs, the National, Hallicrafter, Collins, all these wonderful rigs. And I was just fiddling with them. And they had one hooked up and turned on with an antenna. I turned it on. And after a few minutes, this man walked in. He was my first Elmer, John Collins. He wasn't a ham. He just worked there. But he walked in. I'm fiddling with it, and I thought, I shouldn't be doing it. He said, no, go ahead. And I was tuning around. And he said, do you want to be a ham operator? And I said, yeah. Well, he was running a novice class at the YMCA in Corpus at that time that was just going to start up. So he invited me. And my father took me down there to the YMCA, and I took that novice class. He was a really leading light to me, I didn't have a code oscillator to learn code. So I used my piano accordion keyboard as the oscillator. I'd sit in the couch and squeeze it and that kind of. That was the kind of little fact I wanted to take. And the other thing was that Sputnik had gone up in 1958, and they broadcast the high HI on the TV. And I thought, wow, look at this signal. It was just, it was new to me because I was raised in the country. I was kind of an orphan kind of guy. And to hear these radios was just fabulous. So anyway, we finished the class. There were 26 of us. And we took the test. We had to sit before somebody at that time. And you had to know the code, had to know the theory, and you had to draw a schematic. And I studied like crazy for that test. Well, 24 of us passed. Two of them didn't. One guy broke his pencil and threw it across the room. We were young, kind of emotional, Yeah, I was like, damn, he threw it up there. But, I didn't miss a letter. So I passed the test and received my license in March of 1962. I remember the month, the year. I don't remember the date. I should go back, but licensed March of 1962.
And how old were you?
I had just turned 14.
And what was your first call sign?
WN5CIY, Charlie India Yankee.
That must have been pretty exciting. And there was a number of you. Were these all contemporaries of yours, kids your age, who were taking the novice test at that time?
Yes, we were all in junior high, and we all knew each other and that kind of thing there. And just a whole room full of us. And the guy punched his code machine, and it sent the thing. We all started copying. And some of them are still hams today. I know a couple of people are still hams. A lot of them just, didn't end up being a long-term ham.
That sounds pretty exciting to have such a large group.
Yeah, it was very good.
So what happened after that?
Well, after that, when I got my license, I was kind of poor, and I didn't have any money for a transmitter. So I just acquired some parts and things and built my first transmitter, which was a 6AQ5 oscillator transmitter. It ran about 3 watts, and I put up an inverted V on a pole against the house, and I had a Heathkit AR3 receiver. Now, that's pretty primitive.
Where did you get that receiver? Did somebody loan that to you or give that to you?
No, actually, a friend of mine, Bob Polk, had the AR3, and he got tired of it. So he said he'd sell it to me for $25. So I was working at a 5 and 10 cent store at the time, made $5.80 a week. $5.80, and I saved up $3 a week for 2 months, and I bought that radio. I mean, I was set. Yeah, I was set. This is great. Now, of course, it was an AC/DC radio. So if you touch the metal part of the cabinet or the dial, you got a shock. So I made sure that I had tape on my fingers when I would tune the radio so I wouldn't get shocked. Now, the interesting, I put up an inverted V. Now, one good thing about ham radio was you learn. You learn things, you're active. You learn things you never knew existed. So I put up this inverted V, and it had the wire going down from the top of the pole, and had my coax. And so I wrapped the insulated wire of the antenna legs around the coax connector, and I couldn't make any contacts. I'd call CQs, couldn't make any contacts. So my father knew a man at our church who was a ham, Mr. Ford, and I just forgot his call, but his name was Mr. Ford. He was a very good guy. So he came over, and he looked at it and said, "Oh, it looks pretty good." Then he lowered the antenna, and he said, "You have to remove the insulation and solder it." So I did that, and then I finally started making contacts. That's how it ended up. But of course, after that, I upgraded equipment, some.
Do you remember your first contact?
Yes, I do. WN5 ESE. His name was Butch. He was a blind boy in Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
What did that feel like?
Oh, it was wow. It was one of the most, thrilling experiences. I mean, I was calling CQ. I had a key. I didn't have a real key at the time, but I made one, and it was, a piece of board, and I cut 2 tin strips from a can, and I put, a screw in for the 2 contacts, and put a piece of cloth, wrapped it on top of the tin, and glued it, and I called CQ with that key, and he came back to me. But, when your first contact, you're so excited. You never made one. You hear all this noise coming in. But I just tensed up, and I copied, very carefully. And I got it. Butch. It was that was a fantastic feeling.
Did ham radio play a part then in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Well, it did, but it's in an odd way. In high school, they had a series of what students want to do, and I wanted to design antennas for NASA. So I majored in electrical engineering at Texas A&M, but sadly, after a year, man, I found it boring. It was just like, yeah. And at the same time, I met my wife, and I got tired of hitchhiking every weekend from College Station, Texas, where A&M was, to Austin. So I transferred to UT so I wouldn't have to do all that hitchhiking. In there, being a ham, actually, I got my first technical job at UT as a draftsman. I went for this interview at the engineering antenna and propagation lab at UT, and I took along a pencil-drawn but very precise schematic of a 811A amplifier. And he said, what are your skills? And we interviewed. And he said, what you got? So I unrolled this draft. He said, okay, you're hired. And that supported me for quite a while. So being a ham led to that first job. And my writing skills, kept on going through college. But it seemed like being a ham always got me a job. It seemed like everybody I interviewed was a ham. Yeah, it was odd.
In those days, or you just happened to be in that place where everybody was a ham. Did you end up getting your degree from the University of Texas?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I got my bachelor's degree at Texas in 1971 and my master's degree at Texas in 1973.
In electronic engineering?
No. Since it bored me, and my wife had transferred, UT opened up a whole new world. I mean, they weren't Aggies. They weren't, totally technical. And so I started exploring. I was journalism, philosophy, mathematics, all these things here. And I ended up being in education. So I got my BS in education, the master's degree in library science. Even though that was very different from ham radio, so every time I turned around to get a job, there was a ham I was interviewing with. And even if he wasn't a ham, he was very impressed by the skills of ham radio operators. That's something people to understand. Being a ham back then meant you knew something technical, and that was a good thing to do.
You know what, I think it may still mean that if you're a ham today. I've been thinking that being a ham means that you have a macro view of a lot of technology and how it all goes together. What do you think about that?
Exactly right. I mean, technical back then was different from technical now, but technical across the board is respected. And so I knew how to fix gear, I knew how to draw schematics, I knew how to troubleshoot. Nowadays, I think that the younger hams don't know that. Boy, they know a lot more. I mean, they know how to put together systems, they know how to write software, they know how to interconnect equipment, they know how to troubleshoot it there. So it's a different kind of technical, but both things, I think, are respected because you do have the wider view. I mean, you can't fix stuff without thinking, and that's kind of a thing that everybody needs to do. I think you're right completely.
And now this message from ICOM America. Wish it, wrap it, gift it. These are the code words to your XYL or significant other to get the holiday gift of an ICOM transceiver to meet your ham radio goals in the coming year. ICOM offers a variety of high-performance and innovative products, so make the most of the holiday season with one of these ICOMs today. 'Tis the season to give your favorite ham the SDR they really want, and that's the ICOM IC7610. This high-performance SDR has the ability to pick out the faintest of signals even in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio, or SDR, that will change the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. It is exactly the right rig for DXing, contesting, and rag chewing. Its features include RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receivers allowing you to listen in two places at once, and dual Digicell. The ICOM IC7300 has changed the definition of an entry-level HF transceiver. This compact footprint also includes RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch touchscreen, and a real-time spectrum scope or pan adapter. I have the IC7300 in my ham shack and love being able to see the activity in the bands as I'm tuning. Finally, the IC9700 is ICOM's latest entry in the VHF and UHF amateur transceiver market. The IC9700 should be at the top of every ham's wish list this holiday season, especially if EME or moon bounce or meteor scatter operation will be one of your New Year's resolutions. This all-mode transceiver works in the 2-meter, 70-centimeter, and 23-centimeter bands. Keep your competitive contesting edge with the faster processors, higher input gain, higher display resolution, and a cleaner signal. ICOM IC9700 is the pinnacle of perfection. Features include a 4.3-inch touchscreen color TFT LCD display, dual-watch operation and full duplex operation in satellite mode, real-time high-spectrum scope and waterfall display, voice recording playback function with an SD memory card, and it has the same form factor as the IC7300 and will look beautiful next to any of your new ICOM rigs. Wish it, wrap it, and gift it are the code words that I opened this message from ICOM. However, if subtle hints or leaving ham magazines open to full-page ICOM ads does not seem to have the desired effect on your XYL, then just tell her that you are pining after a new ICOM rig and that you know where the nearest ICOM dealer is near you, and you will be happy to save her the trouble of wrapping it and gifting it. And when you buy that new ICOM holiday rig, be sure to tell your ICOM dealer that you heard it here on the QSO Today podcast. Fa la 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 la. And now back to our program. You wrote an article on the QST website in 2011 about the first field day that you experienced as a novice and the lessons that you derived from it. What did you learn on that field day over 50 years ago, and how do you apply it now?
I was a member of the Corpus Christi Amateur Radio Club, and they were all older hams, but because we had a big class of novices, there were quite a few of us my age in that club. But there was no disrespect. They accepted us. They taught us. It was really a wonderful community to go into. So they had a field day at Rattlesnake Point. It's a little island of seashells in Corpus Christi Bay. And so, boy, I loaded up but by that time I had an NC173 and an S85 and a HX11 transmitter, and loaded this stuff up and built an antenna to take out there and went out there with them, and it was just so much fun. But I was still a novice. So they signed me to 15 meters, which was not very wide at the time. But I would sit there. Then I had a J38 key, which I still have here, and used on Sunday afternoon chats. And I was in CQs and couldn't talk to anybody. So I'd get up and I'd walk around. And the first thing was, I think the first thing I learned was enthusiasm. If you're enthusiastic about it, you can make contacts. I mean, there was one guy that had a DX100 and an NC183D. Now, we are carrying this stuff around. These are 80-pound rigs. They're carrying this stuff around. And he talked to Canada. He was like, yeah. Well, Canada now is easy because we're just so good. But nevertheless, he did. So that first thing was be enthusiastic. I mean, if you're not enthusiastic, you're not going to make contacts. And the second thing was that how much knowledge these guys had. I mean, they put up antennas, which to me was amazing. Weird antennas, good antennas, tall antennas, good ones. And they knew how to hook up their rigs and various things with, they had tube keyers, at that time and all these things. They could hook it up. And I was amazed, how do you know all that? So I knew I had to be enthusiastic to make contacts, and I was, but I really, sometimes I kind of level out myself so I don't appear enthusiastic. But I knew that, and then how to hook things up technically. And the third thing was what fun it was to talk to people all over the country. And it was just, 591B, 593B, and it was just quick contact, but they were still good. So I think be enthusiastic, know how to hook stuff up. That's a weird thing. It sounds so simple, but it's not, especially nowadays with all the digital stuff, you got to put things in sequence. And then fun, just a lot of fun. So I knew the ham radio, I didn't have a long-term view, but I knew ham radio was for me. That was it.
Now, you mentioned in the article that you're working with some new hams now, or at least at the time that you wrote the article on Field Day, and there was this hesitation that they had to actually start calling CQ. They were building up that momentum to start pushing the key. What did it take to get them off center and get them operating?
Well, I think everybody at first has that hesitation, whether it's Mike Fright or CW Fright or whatever you want to call it. People are like, oh, I have to make a contact. I mean, John Collins at the end of the novice class, he let me operate his assistant's DX60 HB10, I think receiver, and had a keyer. And so I'd been listening for months, and he said, well, I need to make a contact. So I went down the basement of the Y, and he turned it on, and it was like, uh-oh, listening is one thing. But then he said, make a contact. And I looked at the key, and I thought, how do I make a contact? I mean, it was like CW flight. So the way to get that off, to get rid of that, I think is, I wrote an article about how to work Field Day later on, I think. I had two friends over who were hams a long time, never made a contact. So I wrote the article, I think, about how to make contacts on Field Day. And we had about a 2-hour session, me talking and them, experimenting, practicing. What I realized, they were afraid of lack of knowledge. They were afraid of not knowing what to do, like they might be embarrassed for some reason. But once they knew what to do, and once they got on the air and made that first contact, it was automatic. Now, of course, the way the Field Day goes, I mean, you just a quick thing, NZ5A, 1B, over, and then they come right back, and that's it. But so they couldn't copy all the time. One guy was on sideband and one guy was on CW. They weren't great, but they were very pleased that they actually made a contact. So it's really, telling people learning how a contact proceeds, and then somehow ignoring the noise that you think is all there, and pressing the key or keying the mic. They just have to learn. It's one thing to talk about a contact. It's another thing to make one. And to make one is a scary experience which you never have.
Bob, do you think that old-timers have an obligation to newcomers to ham radio to be good mentors?
I don't think it's an obligation, but I think people want to help other people that have their same interests, like stamp collectors, quilters, whatever. They want to teach. When you see all kinds of websites, they want to teach people because they enjoy it. So I think some people really feel that, and they are mentors. I don't know if they have the obligation, but I know they have the desire to help people. But some people are shy and don't, But I think there's this gap between old timers and younger hams, in that the older hams, I think sometimes their knowledge looks irrelevant to the younger hams. But, tubes, why do I want to know about tubes? Antennas, I can go buy one for $120. So they think it's irrelevant. But so if someone can say broadcast a desire for the experience of old timers, and old timers desire to meet them, and so they meet, and I think that's good. An obligation, I don't think so. We just earned it on our own, and if someone wants to know, well, we'll certainly talk about it. But if stand aside, I'm going to teach you something, that kind of thing. No, I don't think so.
What's the current rig there?
Okay, current rig, I have a SB200 amplifier.
Which is a Heathkit, right?
Yeah, that's a Heathkit SB200. Oliver, I bought it. It was broken. I fixed it up. It works beautifully now. And it's sure nice to have a little bit more power during this sunspot cycle. I have a Kenwood TS2000 transceiver, and I have an Elecraft K2 transceiver, which is a fantastic receiver. So Elecraft K2 transceiver. And for my portable work, I have an Elecraft KX2. They're a little tiny rig I'm looking at right now. It's, kind of a small envelope size. It's a wonderful little rig. So, and then I have, I'm at my chair on the floor. I have a Collins S line and a Drake B line. I've got all kinds of vintage rigs in the garage and the shelf in my closet, Helicopters National and so forth.
And are all these rigs working rigs? Can you pull them out and put them on the desk and operate them?
A few are not working. I mean, I have to, for instance, on my Collins transmitter, I plugged in PowerSupply and I turned it on after it had been working a long time. And I bought a new power supply from a guy. And I heard this crackling on the left-hand side. Now, crackling is bad. So I turned it off. I have to align, for example, my Helicopters S38 EEB blonde radio. I have to calibrate that. I have to replace some filter capacitors in my Hamilton HQ100 C. So most of them are working. I could, when I first moved here from Austin into Alvin, I had every radio I had in my ham shack. And I had shelves. And I looked at it and I thought, this is kind of show-off stuff. Packed it down, and I just kind of did that. But I've got a lot. I have 130 item inventory I just did the other day of stuff I have.
What is your favorite operating mode?
CW. 100%, except for sideband check-ins to the Maritime Mobile Service Net and other emergency nets. But I always operate CW. And I had a facility for it, and I like it. Because
you've got the Elecraft KX2, does that mean you also like to be a QRP operator from time to time?
Well, actually, it's more than that. In 1979, I think it was, might have been 72. Anyway, I read a review by Alan W. 0EK a review of the Argonaut 509. I was living in an apartment at the time with my wife, and we had just moved to Chicago. It was impressive. I thought, wow, I got to get this. So I had done an army contract, and I got paid. So, and then my wife and I went down. I bought a brand new Argonaut 509. The guy says, "You want me to burn it in?" I said, "No." So I bought this 509, and my wife bought a new sewing machine, and we were set because we had no money forever. It was a long time. And I was doing strictly QRP from the time of the Argonaut in 70. Must have been 79. And from 79 to just a few years ago. And then I got bored with that because it was too easy. After a while, you really get to hear well, timing aspect. Operating QRP for all those years made me a much better operator. You learn how to listen. You learn how to time your calls. You learn how to distinguish between tones of calls. It's very, very educational. But I'd worked 150 countries by then, QRP. So eventually I went down to 2 watts instead of the 5 watts output, 2 watts, and kept working countries. Then I went down to a 1/4 watt and worked about 20 states. And I thought, well, I have to do something different. So I went to HF Power, which to me was 100 watts, and went on from there. When you've been at him a long time, there are certain periods of boredom where, you've done the same thing, even though there's so many things to do, you've done the same thing. And a lot of people drop out of ham radio at that time. Well, look around. There's a million things to do in ham radio. So choose something you might be interested in, try it. I never have been inactive.
Right, it's a big tent. You just received the August QST Cover Plaque Award for your article Optimizing Propagation on 630 and 2200 meters. What does it take to be successful on these ultra-low frequency bands?
Okay, well, first, I am very proud of the article, and I'm very honored to have been awarded the cover plaque, because this was something I had no idea of, writing an article and doing anything about it. I had brain cancer in 2010, and after I finished the treatment, it was a really severe treatment. I had a 4-month lifetime, the doctor said. Anyway, I took this heavy treatment, and I couldn't do anything. I was wasted. And so after about a year of that, I thought, I'm tired of this. I am tired of this. So I set myself little goals. I'm going to walk from the couch straight to the doorknob. I am going to pick up that 6-pack of Coke and put it on a shelf. And I am going to walk further without fainting. So we lived on a ranch at the time, and my ham shack was a little shack 320 feet from the house. And I couldn't sleep it was terrible. So I'd walked early in the morning, walk from the house to the bunkhouse and try not to faint. But of course the ham radio's there. So what are you going to do? You're going to turn it on. So I turned it on and I thought, well, I'll just see what's down here. And I heard a beacon, and in my mind immediately this image of soldiers with the round helmets in World War I sitting in foxholes in a forest. They had just above the foxholes. And for some reason, the image of a beacon was that. So I imagined all these beacons all over the place, little low-power beacons here, and I did that. And so I studied beacons, and it was something I was interested in. I didn't make anyone else would like it. I wrote it up, sent it to QST. They liked it. After that publication, you found me, I've got lots of new friends who are interested in the same thing. We chat all the time now. It's good stuff. What it takes, I think, first of all, I'm still working on a transmit situation. but I listened all the time.
Let me take a quick break here to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast with George, KG6VU, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. George and Jeremy document their projects and make circuit boards available for sale to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Even if you're a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George and Jeremy for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO today. It seems to me that these bands, I think, are experimental, so there's not a lot of licensees there. Maybe we need to define what is success down there. Is success optimizing an antenna system to hear the beacons that are on the band? How would you define success there?
First of all, I listen regularly to both 2200 meters and 630. And on 630, I have heard 3 hams, send them a little message, send them a SWL card, and they responded. A WA4SZE, Sugar Zebra Easy, beacon. I actually hear him quite often. So I think what it takes to be successful is two-way. One, you've got to learn how to listen. You know, there are lots of strange sounds down there, both from within the rig, outside. They're just all so you have to recognize CW. You know, and that's not an easy skill down there because it's so noisy. The second thing is, I think you have to realize your best chance for a contact is on 630 meters. And the watering hole on 630 meters appears to be 474 to 474.5. It's at the very top of the band. The third thing is, if you want to make a contact, you have to know how to send CW clearly and slowly. You know, a lot of guys get them and just zip around. I mean, I can copy 50 words a minute, but when I'm contesting, I say 23 words a minute. That's the sweet spot. But send slowly and clearly. And the third thing is the fourth thing is you have to go vertical antenna for transmit and receive. You have to go vertical. Horizontal antennas that don't work. You don't have the takeoff angle that you have with the vertical. And then you just have to be patient. I've been talking to these guys, and it took them a long time to get set up with the rig, because it's odd. You have to run like 50 watts into an antenna to get 2 watts ERP. And so, you set the rig, you got to get the crystals, you got to get the right receiver, and not all receivers are very good at all down there on those. I mean, for instance, my TS2000 is very rough down there. I can't hear anybody. But when I put the Heathkit low-frequency converter into the KX2, I hear everything. What happened with that the K2, is it's very low noise. I mean, the receiver, when I finished building it, and in fact, my wife bought it for me for Christmas one year, and they came in and opened the box. I thought, my Lord, how can I put this in? 1,200 pieces, little packages. So I had to study up on that. I had to buy, better soldering iron. I had to buy a circuit board holder. I had to buy the magnifying things. But and when I turned it on the first time, I thought it was broken because there was no noise. And then I realized, what? It's working. So it's a very, very low noise receiver. I had a Flex 1500 for a while till it broke and really couldn't be repaired. That was an amazing receiver. SDR receivers are very, very low noise. And if you want something to be successful, you've got to have a really good receiver, which is low noise, and a vertical antenna. And my vertical antenna is simply my Hustler 5BTV vertical. I mean, it's only 23 feet high, plus I have 80 meter loading car on top, which we might get to it later, but just in case, Well, we'll get to that. I was going to say, new hams overestimate what they need.
Antennas that I've seen, the vertical antennas down there, it's kind of a big inductor in order to make that antenna electrically resonant. 630 meters, 474 kilohertz. Do you have something like that at the bottom of your antenna?
No, I don't. For listening, you don't need that. For transmitting, you do. And I have acquired through eBay 3 very large loading coils. I put those in series. I should be able to have enough inductance down there, and they are gigantic coils, And I've been collecting capacitors so I can make them resonant. But still, the height of the antenna is not the maximum height of an antenna by the regulation is 93 feet. So I've learned through the years, we always overestimate what we need. I need a 90-foot antenna to make contacts. No, you don't. You need listening skills. You need patience. You know how to send very, very clearly. That's all you need to have. So I don't have, and now I know that both of the 3 of the people I've talked to, and maybe it's essential, but I don't think so. One has the highest antenna they have is 50 feet. And that big old loading coil at the bottom, they're, built many, many inches diameter, PVC and all this stuff. Well, I've got some Collins coils, and I have some other coils, which I believe will do the job for that. So that's the loading. That's the antenna tuner. Now, part of the article that was left out, I'm going to have to send in again from the port, but I surveyed over 150 commercial beacon stations, and I analyzed what kind of antenna, what kind of support, and where was the antenna tuner located. Makes a nice article, and I realize now what professional people like to have for their stations. Very few of them over 100 feet high, but they all got the hat with the capacitance hanging down on the wires, stuff like that, and they all have those big tuning units, which are available commercially for quite a bit. That's expensive stuff, but yeah, I think the tallest vertical antenna you can put up and the biggest loading tuning circuit at the bottom will do that. When you put in 50 watts and you get out 2 watts, or even 5 watts if you run a couple of hundred watts into it, 5 watts, that's still not a lot. But as I learned from my beacon article and a study of those beacons, it doesn't take a lot when conditions are good to be able to be heard.
You describe yourself as a builder and restorer of electronic gear. You obviously have a lot of stuff. What is the project on your bench these days?
Right now, the project on the bench is really simple. I want to align my Hallicraft S30ADB, which is such a pretty receiver. I need to align my NC183D a little better. I cut the AVC a little bit off. And I need to somehow get the motivation to go through the 32S1 and see what the crackling was, and the 2 direct transmitters, T4X, T4XC, and see why they smoked a little bit before I turned them off. Troubleshooting those rigs is a lot more complicated than working on an AC-DC receiver with 5 tubes.
What was the most challenging homebrew project that was on your workbench?
Several years ago, I wanted to build a portable QRP rig. And there are lots of designs for portable QRP rigs for a band, 40 meters, 80 meters, 20, this and that. I wanted to carry out a box to a picnic table that I could switch bands on. So I designed this multi-band QRP rig, and I built it, and it actually worked. I could actually switch bands, switch crystals, and I was multi-band, which no other QRP rigs at that time had that capability. It was, it was pure CW, but still. So I had to learn how to build an oscillator, how to build a mixer, how to build a lead amplifier, how to build a switching circuit, and then I had to figure all that into a 3-band QRP rig with the VXO and the tunable receiver. And that was quite an effort, but I still have it, I still use it, and it was a lot of fun to do. I never did submit that for publication because I thought, nobody wants to know that stuff. You can buy one.
What do you think is the most valued piece of test equipment that you have on your bench?
Well, there's two of equal value. One is a good VOM or VTVM, and I have a Fluke, and the other is a good signal generator. And I have a World War II signal generator that is absolutely the best ever. It's totally solid, totally steady.
You say on your QRZ page that you're a collector and restorer of non-ham radios. What kind of radios are these, and what do you do with them?
First of all, the radios are from 1923 on up to around mid-50s. So, consumer radios, I have that water can. Two of those, I've got a bunch of, but there's consumer radios. And I like wooden cabinets were used up until probably in 1949 to 50. Then they went into the bakelite and then into plastic and that kind of thing there. I like the radios from about the 20s to early 50s, late 40s, because, wooden, I have one that's just a beautiful radio. It's wooden, has pearl inlay around the dial. It's just beautiful radio. And I found that for $25 at San Antonio Ham Festival.
That's pretty amazing. Do you get them working, and do they sound pretty good?
Oh, yeah. Right now I've got a Philco Super Heterodyne here in my shack on my shelf. I'm looking at it right now. And I got a farm radio, and I got a beautiful Philco Cathedral radio that just has this beautiful resonant sound when the music's on. So I've got those sitting here, and I've got other stuff in the closet. I've got stuff in the garage. I've got stuff in the garage closet. And I am going to try to sell the stuff because, I'm getting older. One day I'll be passing on. I don't want my wife and kids to be overwhelmed with all this ham stuff.
Right. Our kids don't want our stuff. Isn't that right? Yeah,
they don't. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters and a son, and my youngest daughter is also a ham. Her name is Jessica, KD5 Echo United Lima, KD5 Eva. She lives here about 20 miles from us. And, I keep offering my Drakes and my Collins. I had some transceivers I offer. And she doesn't want to have to tune. She wants the no-tune radio, just plug and play. So she doesn't want the stuff, and she doesn't want it. I mean, it's good stuff, but she doesn't.
I know how you feel. I have a whole attic full of stuff that I think I'm going to have to start paring down. You've touched on this, but what kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life?
My wife and I have been married 50 years happily, 3 kids. She has her interests, I have mine. It's she does her thing. I do mine. She does quilting, beautiful quilts. I do ham radio and writing. And actually, it has very little effect. I mean, I think the proof of that is in the fact we've been married 50 years.
But it sounds to me like the secret probably is the allocation of time that you spend with each other and spend in the hobbies. It also sounds to me that it's also very successful that your wife also has a hobby.
You're right about that, the allocation time. In the 80s, after I'd gotten bored with QRP and went to HF and then with it, in the 80s I was into contests big time, and I won lots of contests of various kinds. I have my little book here, all the awards, and but it did lead to some problems because every weekend, Friday night, I'm on the air with a contest the whole weekend, and after realizing that, I thought, I better back off a little bit because I'm never available for anything on the weekends. The amateur radio code used to be published in the handbooks on the second or third page. An amateur radio code, there's the points you should be alert to when you're a ham operator. And then they stopped publishing them. I think that was a very valuable thing to have. when I was in the 8th grade, and I was really hammering every night. I wouldn't do homework, I was doing it. I went to the ham shack table after school, and my father had laid a copy of the amateur radio code on my operating desk. And he had circled, the amateur is balanced. That's one of the codes. The amateur is balanced. So we'll say what that means, balanced. If you look up any old handbook prior to, say, I don't know, 78, I guess they quit, you will see that code. So I realized after all that contesting that, you know what, I'm going overboard here with contesting. I mean, I've won lots of contests at QRP, even placed at number 9 worldwide in one, and it's time to kind of back off and pay attention to family and my wife. So if you have that attitude, ham radio, if you have the attitude where nothing is more important than family, then ham radio becomes second, and it's fun. But if you don't, boy, I've seen problems with people.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. What do you think is the greatest challenge facing amateur radio now?
You know, I was trying to think about that the other night. What's the greatest challenge? And there's a lot, but I think the number one challenge is somehow retaining and cultivating the original purpose and magic of ham radio. The more technology comes along, especially with VH and UHF plug-and-play handhelds, the hobby becomes more like a cell phone communication than as a unique method of communicating. Ham radio in my days was a special thing. Now it's a special thing, but it's kind of not really all that special because I can pick up my cell phone and talk to anybody I want to. And it's easy, and it's little, and it's fun, and it's cheap, so I can just do that. So I think that is the biggest challenge as we go forward.
What excites you the most, then, about what's happening in amateur radio now?
I think the use of satellites. It's less exciting than it was because we had full mode, full frequency satellites like SO50, AO10, and I worked them. And I have a TS790A Kenwood for 2 440 and 1296. It's dual VFO. You can work satellites with it, and that's a lot of fun. Satellites. I think that's a challenge, but the more they send up satellites now, what there are now little CubeSats and fun cubes that have a very limited capability. So they're just kind of curiosities to me instead of technical wizardry. They're just little boxes up there that may have one thing on it to do. But so I think first thing is satellites are exciting. The second thing, though, is I am very excited to see the emergence of new CW operators and a little more technical discussions on the air. Somehow, people don't have to do CW anymore, but you hear a lot of slow operators now. So I work them every time I hear them, so I can say, hey, it's a great hobby, stick with it. And there are a lot more new CW operators based on slow speeds And even a lot of course, nowadays you can't tell by call, but a lot of older hams are going back to CW. And then you hear on the air all kinds of technical discussions about antennas, about rigs, and about all the digital stuff I don't quite understand, but you hear them talking about it. Now, if they would substitute names like I would know for acronyms, that'd be real good, but they don't. But still, I think those are the two things, satellites and kind of the new operators are operating CW, and they're discussing and asking questions about technical issues. But at the same time, what worries me is the fragmentation of ham radio into special interest groups. There's a lot of groups that just have this one interest, and this has this one interest. And I think if you break that down too much, pretty soon you might lose community of ham radio. That probably won't happen, but that does kind of worry me.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams?
I would tell them simply this. This is something I heard on Shark Tank. I would tell them, remember, perfection is the enemy of good. Perfection is the enemy of good. You don't need the toppest at the top of the line starting out if it delays your entry in hamming because of money. You can buy very good rigs, very reasonably now, used or even new. That will get you into ham radio. It'll get you to be in an amazing state whenever you turn on the rig. And my advice is simple as very good to start learning and having fun. Don't think you need, some $10,000 rig or $5,000 rig to have fun. You wanted to get it in the first place. Why? You're kind of interested in it. So get your rig, get on the air, and you'll have a lot of fun. I think that's the big thing. Don't wait.
Well, I think that's fine advice, Bob. I think a lot of old-timers have a lot of equipment sitting under their desk that they could help a newcomer with as well.
Exactly.
Or clubs. Clubs are getting all kinds of equipment that's bequeathed to them from Silent Keys. So there's just a lot of equipment out there, and there's a lot of opportunity for hams to get on the air very cheaply. Great advice. Bob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. This is really a lot of fun, and I enjoy hearing your perspective. Thank you so much, 73.
Okay, Eric, listen, I feel honored that you interviewed me, but ham radio is a great hobby. You're doing a great service because once it goes back, it goes back,
It does.
You did very well. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Bob. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in NZ5A in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages, or when you make your purchases, that you say that you heard it here on QSO Today. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Libsyn, and TuneIn, as well as the iTunes Store. If you own an Amazon Echo, you can say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." I still use Stitcher to listen to podcasts on my smartphone. The links to all of these services are on the show notes pages on the right side. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.